Hello, and welcome back to Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television 2021. I'm Tom Kenny, and in this panel right now, we're here to talk about connection, control, and playback. What you need to know before building an immersive room, which in some senses seems kind of funny. I mean, immersive seems like it's been around a long time, but it's only 8 years, and we have to remember it's an emerging format, just now making inroads into the music side of the industry. So I imagine there's a few things we've learned in these past 8 years that we'll keep applying toward the future. And to begin, let's talk about the considerations. I mean, first, it's often forgotten the space. Start with the room and what you want to do, and I mean that in the sense of what is the purpose of the room and what is the size of the room. You emphasize this a lot when you talk to people. Could you begin kick us off here?
We talk to a lot of customers all the time, and one of the biggest issues that we have to paint a picture in our head as people who are trying to recommend what do they do is, well, tell us about your room. How big is it? What are the size? What are the dimensions? In immersive, you clearly have to pay attention to the height. And what are you going to do in the room? Are you going to have clients in there? Or are you working in music, which has now become kind of a talking point? And are you doing more other things in post-production? What do you have? Have you been 5.1, or are you only stereo, or are you going immersive? So those are the first pieces of the puzzle before you get into anything technical.
Ozzy, you were originally you were back with the Cary Grant Theater, and these first rooms went up. They were big rooms, and there was sort of this perception that you controlled big sound in a big room. It's not really the case anymore, is it? In your experience at Netflix, you certainly found that out.
Well, yeah. I mean, over time, I think, you realize that sometimes a mid-sized room is sometimes better for being a multi-purpose in essence. Those big, amazing rooms, nothing wrong with the Cary Grant. There's nothing wrong with those awesome Atmos rooms anywhere in the world. They're incredible to be inside. But especially when you're mixing for television, you kind of don't want to be in a room that size to mix for television. They were built to be a representation of a theater and to give that theatrical experience. So a mid-sized room, even smaller rooms, depending on the content that you're mixing, makes a lot more sense. And we get a lot of questions from our creatives out there in the world, like, what should I do? Should I build another space? Well, I only have 12 feet high in my room, or this amount of space here and this amount of depth. I already have 7.1. Can I just add the Atmos speakers in? And usually at that point, I hand them over to David and their team at Dolby.
Leslie, you must have made the decision to indulge in the immersive format at some point. What did you think of the purpose of your room, first of all, and the dimensions? How did it fit for you?
Well, the first thing I was looking for was a ceiling, because, you want to incorporate the height speakers. For a while there, during the pandemic and before, I was mixing at home. 7-foot high ceilings isn't really going to cut it. So the first thing I wanted to find in a place, and so I'm renting a place here in the Seven Dials area in Brighton, where the 7-foot high ceilings, and just making sure that you can get that distance from the floor to the driver of the speaker to be about 10 feet was really what we were looking for. And also, making sure that the size of the room, like Ozzy was saying, wasn't too huge, too cavernous. We just wanted to have something that, could be certified for Dolby Atmos home entertainment. And so that's what we were looking for.
And keeping with the theme of things you need to know, Dave Riley, Focusrite was pushing this very early. I mean, I can remember back at AES shows and such in the early 2000s, things were preaching the idea of networked audio and such. Can you give us an overview of like cabling and wiring and inputs and outputs and things that people must know right now? Kick it off there.
Absolutely. So it kind of goes along with what we're talking about with room size and what room you're looking for, because it all goes hand in hand. If you're going to be using a smaller room and you only need to do like a 7.1.4, and you want to do one computer where you're just using the renderer software all enclosed in one computer, not a multi-computer system, you really can just use an interface and a controller that handles everything. Now, if you want to do a much larger system, you can start building out to that. When it comes to getting everything together, uh, get a good stable switch. There's a lot of switches out there that pretty much work and they do what switches do, but not to necessarily fully plug someone, but a good stable Cisco switch will never do you wrong. Um, that's massively important. I think you need to make sure that how you want to get to your speakers. If you want to take an AES feed so you stay digital and convert at the speaker, that's a completely doable thing. It kind of depends, again, what your scenario is and what your goals are. When you were talking about the room size and what you want to do with the room, I think that expands out to, why you would have a 9.1.4 compared to a 7.1.4, right? Adding those two side front speakers may not necessarily be there to fill the room and make it loud enough, but it also could just be you want to hear that pan dimension, right? Because there's not one way to do it. Now, when you're talking about a room that's going to be like an 11.1.6, obviously that dot one is not one sub. So all of these things need to be taken into account, because if your room's that big, you've got 4 subs running probably. So all your channel counts and everything is dependent on, again, what your goal is, what the constraints are. But otherwise, I mean, the easiest thing to say is get good cabling and make sure you've got a good switch, and then Dante won't do you wrong.
Yeah, we've been experiencing that here in our room. We're a 916 room, and our networked audio is all on Dante, and we're a single computer with an S6, and we have yet to run into trouble in terms of hiccups. But we do run everything digitally. We have the Focusrite D16R, and it takes Dante to AES. And in our environment, which is all GLM, everything is on that network, and that gives us the most flexibility in terms of, well, today, do we need to use base management? Do we need to use base management on just the left, center, and right? Or is it just the overheads? I mean, these sort of things we can do with a push of a button. And it all comes under the guise of being able to calibrate accurately at the same time.
Well, take off on speakers. What's the first step? I mean, maybe they have a favorite brand. Maybe they have a favorite way of listening in stereo. But what do you recommend for your first step in selecting speakers, and then what happens?
Well, the brand is, it's either X, Y, or G as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't make any difference, which approach you take. Everybody has their favorites, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the single next piece of the puzzle is calibration, because that's the only place where you're going to be able to have a objective starting point that hopefully everyone else is sitting at. If speakers are located close to the wall, they're going to get boomy. And if people don't adjust for at least that piece of the puzzle, let alone timing, level reference, but the LF balance to the room is incredibly important. And so if somebody doesn't take that piece of the puzzle and deal with that after they've made all these other decisions, because as you said earlier, getting into immersive, the single biggest expense, assuming you're not going out and buying another control console, is the investment in monitors. And that last piece of the puzzle needs to be treated appropriately. And we can't, as players in the business, we've invested a lot of time in getting to a point of having good, objective, automated calibration. If the customer wants to continue to explore that through other manual adjustments, they're free and easy to do that. I mean, our system has enough flexibility to be able to, you can do whatever you want in terms of the monitoring environment. And that's good and bad, but if without having a decent, solid calibration, there's very little benefit of me sending a master file to Leslie and saying, well, here, tell me what you think. Because if she hasn't done the work and I haven't done the work, then we're both in the wrong. We're both in the
Can
wrong
I jump
place.
in there too? I mean, I want to say something about calibration too, because it's the difference. There's a lot of difference in imaging with a calibrated and an uncalibrated system. And if you're talking about objects that are moving around the room, and depending on how many people who are going to be listening to this content, I just want to tell, I'll try and make this a 30-second story, but when we were doing some experiments at Gates Planetarium, we had one of the prototypes of the Trinov calibration system. I mean, a prototype meaning he didn't have, this was Arnaud Laborie, right? He didn't have a top for the for the unit that he brought in. It was a prototype, and he's like, we're using the T1 chip, and we're like, ooh, but this device was able to localize 16 loudspeakers in a hemispherical dome that we were using. And the difference it made was we had an audience, Audio Engineering Society. We had a chapter meeting there, and we said, okay, everybody, we're going to play a sound, point to where you think it comes from. And then we bypassed the calibration. And, the people on this side pointed over there, and the people on that side pointed somewhere over there. And it was, supposed to be coming from a single source that was, localized above. We engaged the calibration. I'll never forget this. And we said, where's the sound coming from? And everybody went, there. So there, you can't overstate what effect calibration has. It's not just leveling the frequencies. It's helping with the timing and the phase, like you said, Will. So yeah, I'm a big fan, and understand why it's important, I think is the message.
100%. All of that is so important. You need to know what you're hearing. And that should play a part of what your room is supposed to be doing, right? You hear stories, or at least I hear a lot of these stories, of people saying that they don't understand why their mix when they use headphones doesn't sound right. And it's like, well, because you're not supposed to just be mixing binaural. That is the end result. It's not I'm in the best situation I can be in.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to just bring up, and I'll mention it. It's probably a session that we could spend another 30 minutes or an hour or 90 minutes on. So, I'll try not to go too deep. But, Dave mentioned it, and I think it's a really good point, which is, the binaural aspect of all things immersive is really interesting. And it was already interesting. And then in this world of COVID that we're living in, it's been a really amazing kind of 12, 18 months in terms of people actually giving enough time and attention to what it means to listen on binaural, how to listen to content binaurally, because you're not able to get into the studio to check something. You're not able to have everyone in the room together, but you can send a binaural stream to people to QC. And we do have people, starting projects, working just purely binaurally in Atmos using the binaural renderer that's built into the Atmos tools, and actually being able to get work done, then go into a room, check it on speakers, and are learning how that translation can work. So it's a really interesting and I think important area. And it's an area that, we at Dolby are very focused on and have been spending a lot of time and energy on, and to, continue to evolve what is possible on the binaural side of things. And we see a lot of potential there. And it's never going to replace being in a room with loudspeakers. But what we do want to be able to achieve is that translation of work, and being able to work in one way and trust that translation can go between those two worlds, and you can be happy with both results. So I think that's a really interesting aspect to all of this, and something that's just going to continue to become more and more, I think, important.
One more question, and I'm just going to say, what's your one thing that stands out that you would tell people you must think about this before you start building your own immersive room? And just pick your own recommendation. Dave Riley, let's start with you. I mean, what would you tell a person when they first walk in the door?
I would absolutely go budget. Make sure you really know what you're about to walk into, because again, this isn't for the faint of heart. No matter what kind of speaker you're using, no matter what kind of audio device you're using, this is not for the faint of heart. Know that this is what it is. Beyond that, the most important thing is make sure you're comfortable with all the tools that you're deciding to use. if you're not comfortable and you don't have 100% faith this is the right way to go, reevaluate. Make sure you're happy with these decisions, because again, almost every company makes something that does something for Atmos. So you just have to make sure that you put all the right ones together.
Yeah, and it's to be fair, it has come down in cost over these last 8
massive.
The cost of entry has come down quite a bit. Well, what do you tell them? I mean, say, besides get Genelec speakers.
Gosh, that's a loaded question. The first thing is, I would agree, know what your budget is. And then I think knowing how to use the Dart is very important if you're going down the Atmos role. And we know people are doing this. And we spend time with our customers filling in the Dart with them. And then from there, we can sort of determine how much headroom are they going to need for the bottom end. It's not a question of what can I get away with. Okay, it's really, the answer is, what do you need to do, and how are you going to service that? So it's really difficult to answer just real quickly, but you got to know what you're.
Say you're in the elevator, Leslie. Your room's almost done. So if you could go back up and rip up page 1 and say, which question should I have asked first? What would that question be?
At what times do my downstairs neighbors play music? Because it's adjacent flats is kind of a thing in the area where I am. But no, I think my message is accessibility. I mean, we're all talking about building these rooms with certification in mind, but there's another school of thought that says, oh, you can throw together a system with just some off the shelf speakers and I want people to be able to create with these tools. And so affordability is kind of a big thing. What is your budget is the question. And does that take you out of the certification route? Probably. Like if you don't have 40 grand, you're probably not going to get certified, but that doesn't mean you can't make immersive content. And so, I wouldn't, one of my goals is to get people included, immersive and inclusive. So, people who don't have the budget and people who don't even have the requisite, who aren't Dante level 3 certified. My sort of mission and raison d'etre, if you will, is to get it in the people's hands so they can make stuff, because I want to hear what can happen.
David Gould, I imagine you're coming up on a decade now of explaining what immersive sound is.
I certainly am very, very close on a decade. And I feel like every year at this event, I've talked about it one way or another. I mean, look, the thing that I would say, well, there's two things. One is it's not so much to do with the room as just more of a general, even a decade in, I still have to tell people to not be scared of it. As in, and this kind of very much ties into what Leslie's saying, where it's just like, I still get a lot of this, oh, it seems very complicated, I don't want to be a part of it. And, early on, there was complexity. Aussie, we did all sorts of complicated stuff. But it's become much simpler, and you don't need to be afraid of it. If you know how to use a panner in the AW, you know how to work in Atmos. Like, there are certain things that you need to know, but it's not worth being afraid of it. Dive in, try it, see what happens, give it a go. That would be my kind of first piece of advice. To the point about reading manuals, there is now a ton of information. There are videos on YouTube. There are videos on the Dolby support pages. There are videos on various blogs. Like, there's a ton of information out there to get people up and running. It's not this kind of big mystery that I think it was a few years ago. So don't be afraid is number one. And the other one, just sort of piggybacking off what I was saying a couple of minutes ago about the importance of binaural. When you're designing your room, make sure there's an audio feed for the binaural back from, if you've got a machine room, back to the studio so that you can actually feed the headphones in. The number of rooms that are like, I really want to check my binaural, but I literally don't have the audio feed to be able to plug a pair of headphones in because I didn't think about it when I was designing the room. So design your room to have an audio feed for the headphones back to the control room.
Ozzy, you're a well-connected guy down there in the Los Angeles area with a lot of friends and a lot of knowledge. I imagine you get called a lot. Say, what do I do? What do you tell them?
I do get quite a few calls and texts, and then I ignore them sometimes. But anybody who's watching this, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. It's a loaded question too. Because it's all changed so much over time. It's changed absolutely so much. But I think one of the biggest things that I get from a worldwide standpoint, being here and working at Netflix, is you get to talk to all these different clients and different people who are building rooms. And then it's like, the main thing is, why are you building the room? Are you sure you need to build that room? Or is what's coming through the door primarily for this reason or for that reason? And don't just go and build it because you think you need to just build it. You got to make sure you know what's coming your way, and that you're doing it for the right business reasons for your facility.
Well, I wish we did have more time, but thank you to our audience for sitting in with us today. Thank you to Genelec and Focusrite for bringing us their knowledge and expertise. And thank you to our panelists, Dave, Will, Ozzy, David, and Leslie. Thank you so much. And we'll be back with more Mix Presents Sound for Film in just a couple minutes.